Hey guys, I'm Joshua from The Last Hike, and today I'll go over what happens when Karens mistake confidence for competence on a half-dome hike attempt during a brutal heatwave. Prepared with only ego and arrogance, they ignored every warning, every sign, and every help offered on the way up, and what the heat ended up doing to both of them on that trail was so devastating, you'll never think of a hike the same way again. It was the 6th of July 2019, and the Happy Isles trailhead in Yosemite National Park was already busy by 6 a.m., despite a heat advisory that had been in effect since Thursday. The forecast high for Yosemite Valley that day was 108 degrees Fahrenheit. At elevation on the exposed granite sections of the trail, where the rock absorbs direct sun for hours, surface temperatures would climb past 140 degrees Fahrenheit by early afternoon. Half Dome is one of the most iconic hikes in the United States, a roughly 1.6-mile round trip with nearly 5,000 feet of elevation gain that ends with a steep cable-assisted climb up a granite face so exposed that Park Service posts explicit warnings about the dangers of the final ascent. The cables themselves are metal poles drilled into the rock with steel cables strung between them. The last 400 feet of the hike requires pulling yourself up a granite slope that pitches roughly 40 to 45 degrees, with nothing but those cables and your grip strength between you and a fall that would end everything. In summer heat, the steel cables absorb solar radiation all day, and by afternoon the metal surface can exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to blister skin on contact. Since 2010, the park has required permits for the cable section because overcrowding was creating dangerous conditions, limiting access to approximately 225-day hikers plus permitted backpackers. Every permit comes with safety information about weather, heat exposure, and the physical demands of the hike, which is basically the park telling you how this can go wrong. Gretchen Landis was 49 years old and lived in a suburb outside of Phoenix. She worked in pharmaceutical sales and had spent the previous 18 months building what she described to friends as her outdoors phase. This basically included a handful of moderate day hikes around Sedona and Camelback Mountain, a guided walk along the Grand Canyon's south rim, and a growing Instagram account where she posted trail selfies with captions about finding herself in nature. The photos were polished, the gear was expensive, and the trails were all manageable for anyone in average shape. She had accumulated roughly 4,000 followers, mostly friends, coworkers, and women in similar demographics. The identity felt real to Gretchen, because honestly, nobody in her audience had the experience to tell her it wasn't. The trails Gretchen was used to in Phoenix were hot, but they were also short, well-maintained, and never more than a 15-minute drive from an air-conditioned car. If something went wrong, you could call for help, and someone would reach you within the hour. Half Dome was 16 miles in a granite canyon, with no cell service above Nevada Fall, no vehicle access, and no quick way out once you pass the halfway point. The heat was comparable, but the infrastructure was not. Her friend Tammy Salcedo was 47 and lived in the same development. Tammy was less fit than Gretchen and less interested in the outdoors brand Gretchen was building, but she had been pulled into the orbit of Gretchen's enthusiasm over the previous year. They had hiked Camelback together twice. Tammy found both experiences difficult but manageable, though she privately told her husband after the second one that she genuinely didn't understand why Gretchen treated it like a major accomplishment. She trusted Gretchen's assessment that the progression from Camelback to Half Dome was reasonable because Gretchen said it with the confidence of someone who had done the research. She had not done the research. It pretty much wasn't. Camelback Mountain is a 5-mile round trip with 1,300 feet of elevation gain. Half Dome is over 6 times longer with nearly 4 times the elevation. The comparison was kind of like running a 5K and deciding you were ready for a marathon. What gets me about these two right from the start is Gretchen had basically built this whole identity around being outdoorsy without ever testing it against anything that could push back. Half Dome was kind of the first trail in her life that was gonna have an opinion about whether she belonged there or not. The trip was planned primarily around content. Gretchen had told her followers she was attempting Half Dome and framed it as her biggest challenge yet. She had bought new hiking boots like 2 weeks before the trip and broken them in on a single 3-mile walk around her neighborhood. She packed a 2 0-ounce water bottle and a second one she planned to fill at the trailhead. For a 1.6-mile hike in July in Yosemite during a heat advisory, experienced hikers recommend a minimum of 1 gallon per person, roughly 128 ounces. Gretchen had roughly 40. Neither woman brought electrolyte supplements, sun protection beyond a baseball cap, or lightweight gloves for the cables. Tammy's preparation was similar. She brought 2 small water bottles, a granola bar, a banana, and wore trail running shoes she had purchased for their appearance rather than their traction. Neither woman brought a first aid kit or any form of water filtration for refilling along the trail. Neither had studied the route beyond looking at photos of the cable section on Instagram. There was also the matter of the permit. Half-dome cable permits are distributed through a lottery system months in advance and are limited to a few hundred permitted hikers per day. Gretchen and Tammy did not have permits. Gretchen had applied for the daily lottery twice, been rejected both times, and decided that the permit system was what she described to Tammy in a text as basically just a suggestion. Her plan was to basically hike to the subdome and talk her way past whoever was stationed there, or just wait until the ranger was busy and go around. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this one. The permanent system exists because people literally died on that route when it got overcrowded. Treating it like something you can just charm your way past is genuinely one of the most dangerous attitudes you can bring onto a trail like this. They arrived at the trailhead at approximately 9:40 a.m., roughly 3 to 4 hours later than most experienced half-dome hikers begin. The standard advice is to start before dawn and be off the exposed sections before the heat of the day. Because in summer, Yosemite's granite absorbs solar energy from the moment the sun clears the valley walls, and by afternoon, the rock becomes a radiator that cooks a person from below while the sun cooks them from above. During heat advisories, rangers treat this advice less like a recommendation and more like the difference between hiking and heat stroke. They had trouble finding parking in the valley and ended up taking the shuttle to the trailhead, pushing their actual start to closer to 10 a.m. A ranger at the trailhead spoke with several groups that morning about the heat advisory. She later stated she had an interaction with 2 women matching Gretchen and Tammy's description, in which she warned about the dangerous heat and told them they needed significantly more water. The response, according to the ranger, was dismissive. One of the women said something along the lines of them being from Phoenix, so they were used to the heat. Phoenix heat and half-dome heat are not the same thing, and honestly the fact that I have to say that out loud tells you everything about how Gretchen processed risk. The trail to Half Dome via the Mist Trail passes Vernal Fall and then Nevada Fall, climbing steep granite steps physically demanding even for fit hikers. Gretchen and Tammy moved slowly from the start. Their pace, later estimated by investigators from photographs, social media timestamps, and witness accounts, averaged roughly 1.5 miles per hour on flat sections and significantly less on steep terrain. For reference, the average hiking pace on moderate terrain is 2 to 3 miles per hour, so they were pretty much behind from the start. The thing about the Half Dome Trail that most visitors never account for is the heat shift. The Mist Trail has shade and spray from the waterfalls, so the first couple miles feel cooler than conditions actually are. But once you pass Nevada Fall, the tree cover thins and the trail crosses long stretches of exposed granite that has been absorbing direct sunlight since dawn. By afternoon, those surfaces can exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The rock radiates heat upward through boot soles, and the dry air pulls moisture off skin so fast that rangers call it invisible sweating, where a hiker can lose over a quart of fluid per hour without ever feeling wet. What neither of them understood was that their bodies had been losing fluid at a dangerous rate since the moment they left the shade of the Mist Trail. By the time a person feels thirsty in extreme heat, the deficit is already significant, sometimes a full quart behind what the body needs to function safely. Dizziness, confusion, and impaired judgment follow, which means the worse the dehydration gets, the less capable you become of recognizing how bad it actually is. By noon, they had reached the top of Nevada Fall, roughly 3.5 miles in and about 2,000 feet up. The shade from the Mist Trail Canyon was behind them now, and the sun was directly overhead, reflecting off every exposed granite surface in every direction. They were already showing signs of strain. Tammy's face was deeply flushed and she was sweating heavily. Her breathing labored in a way that several passing hikers noticed. Gretchen appeared more composed, but was visibly struggling with the heat, her shirt soaked through. They rested at the top of Nevada Fall for roughly 30 minutes, during which Gretchen took several photos and posted one to her Instagram story. Tammy told Gretchen during the rest that she thought they should turn around. She said her feet were burning through her shoes, she was dizzy, and the distance remaining felt like more than she could handle. Gretchen told her the hardest part was already behind them and that the rest of the trail was mostly flat, which was not accurate. Tammy did not push further. They had consumed nearly all their water by this point. The 60-odd ounces they had carried between them was almost gone after 3.5 miles of steep terrain in extreme heat. The return trip would cover the same ground with the cable section and over 4 additional miles still ahead of them. Tammy mentioned being thirsty, and Gretchen told her they could fill up further along the trail. There are no reliable water sources between Nevada Fall and the summit that are safe to drink without filtration, which neither of them carried. Honestly, the water thing alone, that should have been the end of the hike right there. Even if literally everything else went perfectly, they were already in a deficit that was only going to get worse in that kind of heat, and neither of them seemed to register that at all. The section between Nevada Fall and the Subdome approach is roughly 3.5 miles of trail through thinning forest and across exposed granite slabs. It is less steep than the mist trail, but deceptively long and brutally exposed, with scattered tree cover that provides seconds of shade before opening back onto granite storing heat since dawn. Gretchen and Tammy moved through it slowly, stopping frequently. Tammy was limping slightly by 1 p.m. A hot spot on her right heel had turned into a blister she was trying to ignore. Tammy's body had been telling her to stop since Nevada Fall. I genuinely think she knew this was the wrong way before the cables. Gretchen's knees were visibly bothering her on downhill sections. The air temperature at this elevation was in the low 90°F, but on the exposed granite slabs where there was no shade for hundreds of yards at a time, the heat radiating off the rock surface added another 15 to 20 degrees to what their bodies were actually experiencing. Without adequate water, the cumulative effect of heat, exertion, and invisible fluid loss was shutting down their ability to cool themselves. Multiple hikers who were descending from the Subdome that afternoon passed Gretchen and Tammy on the trail. At least 3 of these hikers later gave statements to park investigators. One couple from Colorado described stopping to talk to the 2 women sometime shortly after 1 p.m. and telling them directly that they needed to turn around because of the heat. The husband said the shorter woman, matching Tammy, was barely sweating despite the temperature and looked visibly unwell. Her skin flushed a deep red color that concerned him. He offered them water from his own supply. The taller woman, matching Gretchen's description, declined and said they were from Phoenix and knew how to handle heat. She said people exaggerated Half Dome all the time. The wife said the shorter woman looked like she wanted to accept the water but said nothing. A solo hiker from the Bay Area encountered them around 1:45 p.m. on the approach to the Subdome and described a similar exchange. He told them the cables would be dangerous in this heat because the metal gets hot enough to burn bare hands and the exposed granite offers zero shade for the entire 400-foot climb. He said the taller woman told him she didn't need hiking advice from a stranger and kept walking. Every single person who talked to them on that trail tried to help, and every single one got either dismissed or flat out insulted. I keep coming back to that because the trail was basically full of people handing them the information that could have saved their lives, and they treated it like bad customer service reviews. The Subdome approach is a steep scramble up granite slabs that have been baking in direct afternoon sun for hours, hot enough that hikers in previous summers reported burning their palms on the rock surface during the scramble. It takes most hikers 20 to 30 minutes. Gretchen and Tammy reached the base of the Subdome at approximately 2:45 p.m. When Gretchen and Tammy reached the permit checkpoint, a wilderness ranger conducting permit enforcement that afternoon asked for their permits. Gretchen told him they had applied but didn't receive them and asked if they could go through anyway since they had come so far. The ranger told them no, permits were required and the conditions were too dangerous. He pointed out that they appeared to have no water remaining and that the cable section in this heat with no hydration was life-threatening. He told them he had already turned back 6 groups that afternoon because of the heat advisory. Gretchen argued. She told the ranger they had been hiking all day and deserved to at least see the cables, asked to speak to someone else, asked if there was an exception process. The ranger maintained his position. He told them the cables were not safe in their current condition, that the steel was hot enough to cause burns, and that both of them showed visible signs of heat exhaustion. I need to be careful here because the ranger genuinely did his job. He told them no, and what Gretchen did after that was entirely on her. At approximately 3:05 p.m., the 2 women left the checkpoint area. The ranger assumed they were beginning their descent. Instead, they left the established route and crossed exposed granite terrain to reach the cable route, a scramble that was steep, unprotected, and hot enough to feel through their shoes. The ranger did not see them access the cables because he was engaged with another group. This is the moment that gets me because up until now, you could argue they were just unprepared. After the bypass, they were making a choice. Gretchen and Tammy reached the base of the cables at approximately 3:15 p.m. The cable route was completely deserted. The steel cables had been absorbing direct sunlight for nearly 10 hours, and the metal was radiating heat. A hiker resting in what little shade existed near the base later told investigators he had shouted to them that the cables would burn their hands without gloves. The reality was that the cables were empty because basically everyone who understood the mountain had already left. The heat had cleared the route more effectively than any ranger ever could. They began ascending. The cables require continuous pulling effort while stepping between wooden crossboards placed roughly every 10 feet on the granite slope. Under normal conditions, this is physically demanding. In a heat wave with the cable surface exceeding 140 degrees Fahrenheit, every grip becomes a burn. The granite under their feet was hot enough to feel through boot soles. The angle is steep enough that without the cables, the face would not be safely climbable without technical equipment. The drop on either side falls away across hundreds of feet of steep granite terrain. Experienced half-dome hikers describe the cable section as the most exposed terrain they have ever been on, and most of them complete it under ideal conditions, with fresh legs, full hydration, and cool metal under their hands. Gretchen started up first, wrapping her hands around the cable and immediately pulling back. The steel was searing. She pulled her shirt sleeves over her palms and gripped through the fabric, pulling herself from crossboard to crossboard. The difference was that every trail she had ever attempted was something her body could actually do. Tammy followed roughly 10 feet behind, doing the same thing with her sleeves, but her shirt was thinner and the heat penetrated almost immediately. I keep picturing that. Using your shirt as a glove on 140-degree steel. Honestly, that says everything about how far past rational thinking she already was. Tammy's pace slowed dramatically within the first 50 feet. She was stopping at every crossboard, her breathing shallow and rapid, and her skin had shifted from sweating heavily to completely dry, flushed a deep, blotchy red and hot to the touch, which is one of the most dangerous signs of heat stroke progression. She had stopped sweating entirely. When your body stops producing sweat in extreme heat, it basically means the cooling system has completely failed, and that's the line between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Once you cross it, things move very fast. She told Gretchen she felt dizzy and that the rock was spinning. Gretchen told her they were almost there. They were not almost there, not even close. They were still roughly 350 feet from the summit, with the steepest section still ahead. Tammy kept going because Gretchen told her to. The same dynamic that had basically governed their friendship for 18 months was now playing out on a 150-degree granite face with no shade, no water, and no way to cool down. At approximately 3:35 p.m., roughly 200 feet above the base of the cables, Tammy stopped moving. She was gripping the cable with both hands, but her body had gone rigid and her eyes were unfocused. Gretchen, roughly 15 feet above her, called down to her repeatedly. Tammy did not respond. Her legs began to buckle and she slumped sideways against the cable, her body weight catching between the cable and a crossboard. She was still technically upright, but only because the cable infrastructure was holding her there. Gretchen descended to Tammy's position. Tammy's skin was completely dry, burning hot to the touch, and had turned a deep, mottled red. Her breathing was rapid and erratic, and she was not responding to her name or to physical contact. These are basically the textbook signs of severe heat stroke, when the body's core temperature goes past 104 degrees and the brain starts shutting down systems to try to protect itself. The confusion, the loss of coordination, the dry burning skin, it's all the body saying it genuinely cannot cool itself anymore, and without intervention, the organs start failing within minutes. Gretchen tried to get Tammy to drink from what little water remained. Tammy could not swallow. Her muscles were cramping and jerking involuntarily against the cable. I've sat with this part for a long time, and the thing that genuinely keeps me up is Gretchen had to make a choice on those cables. Stay with Tammy, who was dying in front of her, or leave her and try to go get help, and she chose to go. Probably because she thought if she could just reach someone, Tammy would be okay. She genuinely thought there was still time, and I keep thinking about how she never saw Tammy conscious again after she let go of that cable. Gretchen spent roughly 10 minutes with Tammy before she began descending for help. She left Tammy propped between the cable and crossboard and began moving down the cables. Gretchen had been on the mountain for nearly 6 hours in extreme heat, with effectively no water for the last 4. Her hands were blistered from the hot cables. Her own body was in severe dehydration. She made it to the base of the cables and began the sub-dome scramble down. The granite slabs had been in direct sunlight all afternoon, hot enough to sear exposed skin on contact. Her coordination was failing, her vision narrowing, her steps uncertain on terrain that required precise foot placement. Approximately halfway down the sub-dome scramble, Gretchen lost her footing and collapsed on the exposed granite. A hiker, ascending from below, found her sprawled on the rock, unresponsive, with burns already forming on her exposed arms and the side of her face from the heated surface. He poured his remaining water over her head and neck and began shouting for help. I honestly don't think Gretchen even understood she was dying. I think she genuinely believed she was going to get help and come back for Tammy, and that makes this so much worse for me. Park rangers reached Gretchen on the sub-dome within 25 minutes. She was briefly conscious and told them she had left her friend on the cables, that she believed Tammy had passed out and needed a helicopter, and she lost consciousness shortly after. She was airlifted to a regional hospital. Her core body temperature at the time of evacuation was measured at 107.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Organ failure had already begun. Gretchen Landis did not survive transport. She was 49 years old. A rescue team reached Tammy on the cables approximately 40 minutes after Gretchen's collapse was reported. Tammy was unresponsive and had no detectable pulse. She was pronounced dead on the cable route. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be heat stroke based on the condition of her organs and the circumstances of exposure. Tammy Salcedo was 47 years old. No permits, no water, no gear, every warning dismissed. They bypassed the checkpoint and started the cables at 3:15 p.m. on metal baking for nearly 10 hours with nothing left to drink. The ranger at the subdome had turned back 6 groups that afternoon. In 8 seasons, it was the first time a bypass ended in fatalities on his watch. That ranger is the one I honestly feel for the most, because he did everything right and the 2 people who ignored him are the ones who died, and he gets to live with that. Both of them died on that mountain. Tammy on the cables and Gretchen in a helicopter. And I genuinely believe that if either of them had been hiking alone, they would have turned around at Nevada Fall or at the subdome, or maybe even at any of the dozen exits the trail gave them. But together they built this dynamic where the person making the decisions had no idea what she was doing, and the person who knew something was wrong couldn't say it loud enough, and in extreme heat with no water. That is what killed them both. Gretchen's last post was from Nevada Fall. Shortly after noon, 340 likes, a caption about conquering fears. The account is still public. Tammy was 47. She didn't want to be on Half Dome. She was there because her friend told her she could do it, and she believed her friend more than her own body. Gretchen was 49. She believed it too. The mountain didn't kill them. The heat didn't kill them. The same voice that had been telling Tammy to keep going for 18 months told her to keep going one more time, and this time there was nowhere left to go.